Okay, our next podcast is going to go into reproduction. So in this, we're going to be looking at the reproductive system, and so we start by mentioning that, of course, reproduction is necessary in order to get genetic information on to the next generation. And we start by looking at some ways of doing this, or ways that animals can accomplish this in invertebrates, in very simple animals. And some animals can reproduce asexually. Asexually is where there is not a combination of sperm and egg to produce that new offspring, but rather it is basically producing an offspring that's genetically identical to the parent. So there are some different forms of asexual reproduction. We mentioned some of these in the outline, like budding here. Budding is the process where a part of the parent's body will grow or develop into a new individual. So hydras are examples of animals that can asexually reproduce. Let's see, here's an example. Here's Hydra here. So Hydra this is one individual Hydra here, and here's another one that's just growing off of that one. So in this case, there was no sperm and egg that united to produce this. This individual will separate from that parent and then grow into a new and just become a new individual. If you looked at the genes of this individual and that individual, genetically identical. So it's basically like growing, excuse me, a clone of yourself. And so that's an asexual form. Now they're showing some eggs here that this hydra has released, and hydras can produce sperm and eggs, so they can sexually reproduce also. So if they do that, then they are going to provide a unique set of genes for that offspring. So budding is one example. Another example is fission, which is just the splitting from one organism, just splits from one into two. Here's an example of an anemone that is just splitting. So this one right here is one, but it's in the process of splitting into two. Again, same individual, so it's the genes are genetically identical to each other. And then the last example we give there is a process called fragmentation. Now, fragmentation is when an animal has an ability to regenerate part of its body, and so it can grow part of its body, like a sea star can grow a new arm, or a lizard, if its tail falls off, can regrow a new tail. So that's growing a new part of the body. Sometimes this can happen and the organism, part of it can split off, and that part that split off can grow into a new individual. So there are cases where fragmentation can develop into the generation of a new individual. And so that's a third type of asexual reproduction. But mainly what this chapter is going to deal with is sexual reproduction. And of course, sexual reproduction involves sperm and egg uniting to form a genetically unique offspring. So our gametes are sperm and egg in this case. All right. There are some animals that can do both, like the hydra that we just mentioned. It can actually do both types of that, and we'll get into some of those variations in just a minute. Let's see. So in sexual reproduction, we have different forms, and in the outline, forms of the fertilization of the sperm and egg. So the forms are whether it occurs inside the female body or outside the body. And so those are referred to as internal or external fertilization. A lot of aquatic animals, like these frogs right here that are mating, practice external fertilization. So they're mating, and the female will release her eggs in the water during mating, and the male will release his sperm during mating, and they fertilize outside of the female body in the water. A lot of aquatic animals, again, practice external fertilization. And so that is, and then of course, internal fertilization is where that egg is fertilized in the female. The sperm fertilizes the egg inside the female. So we can begin by looking at the human reproductive structure. So we look at the human, the woman structures to begin with, and of course we have the egg, which is large and non-motile. It does not move. It is large, and then we have it is produced. So it is produced, remember back from our Bio 1, we had the cell division processes of meiosis and mitosis. So meiosis is what produces the sperm and egg. And in the female, this is occurring in the ovaries. So that's where the eggs come from. They are produced in the ovaries. They travel via the oviduct to the uterus right here. And that is where the sperm, which will travel through the vagina and will fertilize the egg. And that's where the fertilization takes place, and then some of the early embryonic development will take place there. All right, so that is the human, that's the female reproductive structures, and then the male reproductive structures are going to include the testes. This is going to be the site of meiosis in the males, is going to be in the testes. And so in here, it actually shows you the development of the sperm, the differentiation of the cells till we get to the sperm. And the sperm are motile. They have flagella, these long flagella that come off of these, and they are motile, traveling to the egg. So they are produced, the male gametes are produced in the testes, and they are motile. All right. Now we want to look at some variations on this sexual reproduction that we see throughout the animal kingdom, and we'll look at some of that variation. But first, your book makes a connection here with the sexual reproduction and the transmission of certain types of infections. And these infections can be bacterial, viral, protozoan, and fungal. This lists out some of these. These are referred to as STDs, sexually transmitted diseases. And so during the act of sexual interaction, sexual intercourse, these types of bacteria, viruses, and protozoans and fungi can be transferred. And so this shows some of those different diseases. All right, so we want to look at, we mentioned the sperm being motile. Again, this shows the flagella that it uses for motility, traveling to the egg, and then the egg is large and stationary. And this right here shows a size variation. Not sure of the species that this is looking at, but it's common throughout the animal kingdom and in humans that the egg is very large. In this case, we're looking at one egg, this kind of yellow structure in the back here, and it is attempting to be penetrated by all of the sperm that are on the egg. And so one of these will be successful in fusing with that egg to get its genes connected to it. So that's the process of fertilization there. So we can look a little closer at this fertilization process and how it comes up. The sperm actually have enzymes on the cap there that it uses to break down the coat of the egg to get its genetic information. And then we have our sperm nucleus and our egg nucleus that fuse together. Remember, those are haploid from meiosis. So when they fuse back together, then we're restored back to the diploid number. And so that's the fertilization process. Let's see. So before looking at the development after fertilization of that embryo, I want to look at some variations on on reproduction. We already mentioned one of those, and that was in the case of the hydra, when it can asexually reproduce and sexually reproduce. Another one that can do that, those two types, is Belia right here, a little small aquatic invertebrate. That example of being able to carry out both asexual and sexual reproduction is called metagenesis. Metagenesis. So that's a variation on reproduction. Another variation is called parthenogenesis. We mentioned that in the outline. And that's when a female can produce an egg that does not have to be fertilized by a sperm. And the egg can go on to develop into a new individual. Of course, that egg, that new individual, is going to be genetically identical to the mother because we have no new genes being added to it. So it will be a female. And so there are cases where there's populations of, like, there's some lizards that can carry this out, where the female, of course, the sperm can fertilize the egg, but the egg can also just go through full development. And there's some populations of these parthenogenic lizards that are all female. And so that's parthenogenesis. Another example of variations within reproduction is hermaphroditism. Hermaphrodites are animals that contain both male and female reproductive systems or structures. So an example of those are earthworms. Earthworms are actually hermaphroditic. They contain both male and female structures. So these are mating right here. So when they mate, you may ask, well, which one's the male, which one's the female? They have a ritual to determine, and they go through this ritual to see which one's going to be the male and which one's going to be the female during this practice called penis fencing is what it's referred to as. But that's called hermaphroditism. And there are some invertebrate animals that have both. They have both a male and female structures. Talking mainly invertebrates here that have both of the system, and they produce both sperm and egg. Similarly, plants, most plants are hermaphroditic. They have anthers that contain the pollen where the sperm is, and they have ovules for their eggs in the flower, and so they're hermaphroditic. All right, so those are variations within reproduction. The last thing we want to talk about is after that sperm has united with the egg, it then goes through a developmental process called embryonic development. And so the sperm and egg, once they unite, we refer to that as the zygote. And then it starts growing. So this in humans is going to be the development of the baby there. And so we start with a zygote. It goes from one cell into two cells. This process is the other form of cell division, mitosis. So again, we went through all that process of what's going on with the chromosomes when all this is happening. But so we start from one cell to two cells. Two cells go to four cells to 8 cells, so forth. And so in all humans and in animals, this is very similar. And we form a hollow ball of cells. It's the first thing that occurs here is the development of this hollow ball of cells called a blastula. So this process right here from zygote to blastula is called cleavage. And so again, this is almost identical throughout the animal kingdom and in humans, where just no characteristics are starting to form yet. That's just the initial stages. Now, the second phase of embryonic development is where we start to develop some features, and it starts to begin to take on some characteristics, not really specific characteristics, but it starts to fold. This little hollow ball of cells starts to fold. Here's an example of a frog blastula here. It starts to fold inward. We get these distinct layers of tissue here that start to form in that hollow ball. And then that folding that's occurring here in this process is going to form into the organs inside the body. This process is called gastrulation. And so after that process, we then go through our developmental stages. And so in this, in humans, this is divided into trimesters. And so in this, we get starting to develop into unique features. Here we start seeing features that represent that organism. So here we see some human features beginning here. Here's a little male. You see right there. And so it goes through, and in humans, this is divided into trimesters. So we have those different stages. And that's where we end our lecture on reproduction.